What happens when a wife decides her body is a shortcut to her husband's promotion? How do quiet notes, saved messages, and one shiny new job title turn into the very proof that ends their marriage in public? Can a woman who swears she only wanted to help survive when the promotion she bragged about becomes Exhibit A? My name is Ianthe, and I always thought I was the one with vision in our marriage. I work as a marketing coordinator, so my whole job is to see patterns and chances that other people miss. When I looked at my husband, Evan, I did not just see a man, I saw wasted potential and lazy managers. He is smart with numbers, careful with money, and good with people when he relaxes. But at work, he stays quiet and waits to be noticed. I told him many times that no one rewards quiet in this world, and he would just smile like a boy who did not understand the rules of the game. I hated that smile because it made me feel like I was the only adult in the room. It felt normal to think that I should manage his career because clearly he was not doing a good job at it. In the mornings, our kitchen already showed the truth of us, even if no one else saw it. Evan liked his plain mug with a blue stripe, and I liked my tall glass cup with the gold rim, and lately those two cups sat on opposite sides of the counter instead of close together. I noticed the distance in a quick, sharp way, then told myself it was not important. I asked him why his boss kept promoting other people who did not work as hard as he did. He said the company had a process and that promotions took time, and he sounded almost proud of waiting like that. I told him that patience was just fear trying to look polite, and he said I was being harsh. Inside, I rolled my eyes and thought he would still be in the same position at 50 if I let him lead. I told myself that if anything big was going to happen for our family, it would start with me, not him. The first time I really studied his boss, Clive, was at a company happy hour that spouses were invited to. I watched from a corner while everyone tried to get a moment of his attention like he was some kind of king. Evan stood near the snack table talking to a junior analyst about football, not about his new report, not about his ideas. I asked Evan later why he did not go and push his project to Clive directly. He said he did not want to bother the man after hours, and that good work spoke for itself. I told him that in my field, good work did not speak, it shouted, and the people who shouted louder got the budget and the praise. He looked hurt for a second, and then said he was just not like me, and that he liked to let things happen in their own time. In that moment, I felt a mix of love and disgust, and I chose to listen only to the disgust. When I finally spoke with Clive on my own, it felt almost too easy. At another after-work event, I moved closer to him when Evan went to the restroom, and I made a small joke about how my husband worked twice as hard as everyone else, but still got ignored. Clive laughed and said he had noticed Evan's steady work, and that maybe Evan needed someone to help him be seen. I heard the word and held on to it like a secret gift. I told him that some people just were not good at selling themselves, and sometimes their partners had to do it for them. He said that made me a supportive wife, and I felt a small spark in my chest at that phrase. When I went back to Evan, I told him Clive thought his work was solid, and he should be more confident, and he smiled at me like I was his lucky charm. I liked that feeling much more than I liked his quiet honesty. At home, small signs began to appear that Evan was reacting to something, though I did not understand what at first. One evening, when he left his phone on the table, a calendar reminder flashed briefly on the screen that said, Downtown Cafe, 8:40 a.m. It did not have a client name or any detail, just that title and time. When he saw me looking at it, he took the phone quickly and said it was just personal stuff. I laughed and asked if he finally had friends outside work, and he just said he was sorting some things out. On his laptop, there was a blank spreadsheet open when I walked past, just columns with dates and a few short notes at the top. But he minimized it so fast that I only caught a glimpse. I told myself he was finally organizing his tasks like an adult, and I felt almost proud that maybe my tough words had pushed him. I did not for 1 second think it had anything to do with me. At night in our bedroom, the air felt heavy, but I refused to name it. Evan talked about feeling stuck at mid-level, and he said he worried that the promotion would never come. I told him he was the reason it had not come yet. Not the company, not Clive, just him and his quiet way. He said that was unfair because he worked hard and did not play politics, and he asked why I could not just be happy that he was honest. I told him that honesty did not pay for a bigger place, and that Noel deserved more than a father who was scared to ask for what he wanted. He went silent and rolled to his side of the bed, pushing the blanket between us like a small wall. I lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking that maybe I was the only one brave enough to do what had to be done. In my mind, I was already planning the next time I would just happen to talk with Clive, without Evan there. The next morning, while I stood at the counter with my gold-rimmed cup and Evan stood far away with his blue mug, my phone buzzed on the table between us. For a moment I saw the preview light up with the name Clive H. and the line about drinks to talk about Evan, before Evan's shadow fell over the screen. The text from Clive stayed on my screen even after Evan walked away with his mug. It said that he wanted to have drinks later and talk about Evan's future in the team. I stared at those words for a long moment and felt a warm rush of pride. This was exactly what I had been talking about. I told myself that this was proof that I was right, that my way of pushing and playing the social game actually worked. When Evan came back to kiss my cheek before leaving, he said he hoped today would be a good day at work, and I told him I had a feeling something big was coming. He smiled in that simple way again, and I thought he had no idea what I was doing for him. At the office, I arrived early on purpose and wore a dress I knew made people look twice. I told myself it was just marketing, but this time my product was my husband's career. I saw Clive near the coffee machine, speaking to a couple of managers, and I waited until they left. When I stepped up beside him, I joked that he was making my husband's life very hard by not seeing how much value he brought. He laughed, and he said he had been thinking about Evan a lot lately. He said there was a big account coming up and that he wanted the right person in charge. I told him Evan was ready but just needed someone in his corner. He looked at me in a slow way, like he was weighing more than just my words. He said maybe I could help him understand what Evan really needed. Later that day, Clive sent another message asking me to come to a small conference room after hours to talk about strategy and positioning for Evan. I told myself there was nothing wrong with this, that wives went into their husbands' worlds all the time. When I walked into the conference room, the lights were dim and his laptop was open with Evan's name highlighted on a list. He said he wanted my honest view on why Evan held himself back. I told him that Evan was too modest, too quiet, almost scared to show his full value. Clive nodded and moved closer, and he said it was lucky that Evan had a wife who was not afraid to push. His hand rested on the table near mine, then on my wrist, and then we were standing too close. I remember thinking this was the moment where weak women would stop and strong women would do what needed to be done. When we went out for drinks after that, it felt almost like a second interview. We sat at a tall table in the corner of the bar. He asked about our home, our plans, our daughter, and I framed it all like a story of a man who just needed one good break. I told him that if Evan could just move up one level, everything would feel different, and we could move to a better place and give Noel more. Clive said he liked people who believed in their partners that much. At some point, the talk about Evan slipped into talk about me, about how smart I was, how direct I was, how rare that was. I told myself that letting him say those things was a small price to pay. When he suggested we go somewhere quieter, I did not pretend to misunderstand. I said nothing at all, just followed. The hotel room itself is not important, or at least that is what I decided after. I told myself it was just a space where I signed an invisible contract on Evan's behalf. There were no slow, romantic games. It felt more like an agreement. I thought about our kitchen and our small apartment, and that red line in the budget where rent sat, heavy and high. I thought about what it would look like when Evan finally got the promotion, how people would look at us then. I did not think about how he would feel if he knew the real story behind it. I told myself I was protecting him from a hard truth, that it was better if he never knew, and that my body was simply a tool I could use. The next week, the shift at work came fast. Evan was suddenly added to a big project that had been going to another guy for months. People started asking him questions in meetings, and his manager invited him to sit in on things he had never been part of before. He came home excited, almost glowing, and he said it seemed like someone had finally noticed him. I smiled and said maybe the universe had eyes after all. Inside, I felt like I was the universe. He asked if I had said anything to Clive, and I shrugged and told him I might have mentioned his name once or twice. He said I should not worry about his job and that he wanted to earn it himself. I answered that no one was pure, not really, and that what mattered was where we ended up. Little odd details started to stack up around the same time. One afternoon when I walked past Evan's desk, his phone buzzed on silent. The screen lit up with a call labelled private. He picked it up quickly and stepped into the hallway, lowering his voice. When he came back, I asked who it was, and he said it was just something personal he needed to sort out. He did not offer more, and I decided not to push. Later that evening, I saw a binder on the table at home with a small label that said bank. Inside were printed statements and notes in his handwriting. He closed it when I came in and said he was just looking at their savings. I tossed a light joke at him about finally acting like a man with a plan, and he gave me a strange look that I could not read. On his laptop at night, when he thought I was not watching, a small message popped up in the corner of the screen that said, "File uploaded successfully." I saw a folder name flash for a second before he clicked it away, but I could not catch it. I asked him if he was moving to a new system at work, and he said something about making sure he had backups of important things. I clapped my hands and said he was turning into me, always organised, and he smiled without humour. I told myself he was just stressed, and that once his promotion became official, he would relax again. The more his position grew, the more I believed I was the true author of his success. At a small team drink, Jenna joked that Evan must have a guardian angel because Clive suddenly loved him. I laughed and said maybe his guardian angel wore heels and worked in marketing. Evan looked at me sharply and I pretended not to notice. He asked, later at home, what I meant by that. I told him I was just playing and that he should learn to take a joke. I thought I was being charming. He looked tired. A week after that, we had another office event in a bar, this time to celebrate the project going well. Some partners were there, and everyone was more relaxed than usual. I moved around the room talking to different people, always making sure my laughter and bright comments flowed toward Clive and Evan. At one point, while Evan was on his way to the restroom, his manager walked up to him with a careful smile and said they needed a quick word about his sudden visibility. At the same time, my phone buzzed, and I saw Jenna had tagged me in a group photo from the rooftop, with me standing between Clive and Evan like the centre of everything. The meeting with Evan's manager did not seem serious at first. He came back from that talk with a strange tightness around his mouth, but he told me it was nothing, just some questions about how he felt in the new role. I said this was what happened when you finally got noticed. People wanted to check in with you. He said his manager asked if he felt comfortable with all the attention from the top. I laughed and said that sounded like jealousy. I could tell he did not find that funny, but I decided he was just nervous about being important for the first time. Soon after, there was talk of a proper dinner to celebrate Evan's promotion and the project result. I loved the idea at once. A long table, nice clothes, other people watching us as a successful couple. I told Evan he owed me one fancy night at least. He said the dinner was for the team, not for me, and I said there was no team without me. He said I was making everything about myself. I reminded him that I was the one who saw his worth before anyone else, and that I was not going to sit in the shadows now. I could feel him pulling away even as I moved closer. The restaurant they chose was bright and loud, with long wooden tables and big windows. When we arrived, Clive was already there, standing near the head of the table talking to some partners. I watched his eyes slide over me and then away, too fast, like he did not dare to look. I told myself that was because he respected my marriage, not because he was trying to erase what we had done. Paolo and Jenna waved us over and made space. Jenna joked that the man of the hour had arrived, and Paolo added that maybe the real star was the woman who kept showing up at all the right drinks. I flipped my hair and said someone had to make sure talent was seen. As the food came out and the drinks flowed, the comments grew looser. One co-worker said it was amazing how fast Evan had climbed once Clive noticed him. I replied that men like Clive only noticed what was put right in front of them. People laughed, and someone across the table lifted their phone to start recording a little video for social media. Evan shifted in his seat and asked me quietly to tone it down. I told him not to be boring, that this was his moment, and that people loved a story. In my head, I was the charming wife making smart jokes. In his eyes, I could see that I was turning him into an object. At one point, Clive got up to make a small speech. He talked about performance, about numbers, about steady hands at the wheel. He said Evan had delivered good work for a long time and that this promotion was earned. I listened with a half smile and thought about the hotel room, about the way his hand had closed around my wrist while he promised to see my husband. When he said Evan was an example of merit, I nearly laughed out loud. I raised my glass and called out that some of us knew what it took to make people finally see merit, and a few people whistled. Clive's eyes flicked to me for a second, quick and sharp, then away. Later, when I went to the restroom, two women from another team stood near the sink talking. They did not see me at first. One of them said it was crazy how fast Evan moved after Clive's girl started showing up. The other asked if she meant me. The first one said she had seen the videos, the way I leaned in, the little jokes. She said it was always the quiet ones who had the loud wives. I stepped out of the stall and made a point of washing my hands slowly. They went silent, and I smiled into the mirror as if their words did not touch me. Inside, I felt a mix of power and panic. People were talking, but at least they were talking about me. Back at home that week, I started to notice more of Evan's small, secret habits. One evening, I walked past his desk and saw his phone screen open on a message thread titled Follow Up. He snapped it shut as I passed. I asked if it was work chat, and he said it was nothing important. In the living room, our printer hummed late at night, even though no one was sending anything obvious to it. When I checked the tray in the morning, there was a single blank page sitting there. I asked Evan if the machine was broken. He said he must have pressed something by mistake. On the key tray by the door, I noticed a small USB stick with that day's date written on a label in his neat writing. I scooped it up and joked that he was playing spy. He took it from my hand and said he needed to keep some things safe. The night before the big celebration dinner, he lay on the edge of the bed, facing away from me. I tried to touch his shoulder, but he stayed still. He said people at work were acting strange, hinting that there was more behind his promotion. I told him that people were bitter and small and could not stand to see someone win. I said this was the price of success, and that he should grow a thicker skin. He asked if I had given anyone a reason to talk. I said if he was going to thank me, he should do it properly, and if he was going to accuse me, he should have proof. He fell quiet. I felt annoyed that he would not just say, "Thank you," and let it go. On the evening of the dinner, the long table at the restaurant filled with faces and phones and glasses. Noelle stayed with Ruth, which I liked because this night was about adults and victory. Clive sat across from me, Evan beside me, Jenna next to him, everyone loud and excited. After dessert, someone shouted that we needed a toast for the power couple. I stood up half on my chair, a little drunk, and raised my glass high. I leaned across the space toward Clive and joked that when your husband would not push for himself, sometimes you had to push the boss instead. The table burst into laughter and fake shock. I heard whistles and felt all eyes on us. The photo from the dinner spread faster than I expected. Jenna posted a short video of the toast, with me laughing and leaning toward Clive, and the caption said something about power moves and making things happen. For a few hours I loved it. People commented with fire emojis and laughing faces, and some said they needed to learn from me. Then the tone shifted. A few comments asked if Clive's wife had seen it. Someone wrote that now they understood why Evan had risen so fast. I told myself those people were bitter nobodies, but the tight feeling in my stomach did not care about my logic. At work, the atmosphere changed in a quiet but sharp way. Conversations stopped when I walked into the break room. Two junior analysts were whispering about sleeping up and went silent as soon as I opened the fridge. One of them asked loudly how long Evan and I had known Clive, and the question felt loaded. I just smiled and said it had been as long as it needed to be. Later that day, I passed HR and saw Ms. Cole look up at me with that careful, neutral face they must teach in trainings. She asked how things were going. I said everything was great and we were all grateful for the company's support. My words sounded fake even to me, but I held my chin high. On the weekend, I took Noelle to the park playground to burn off some of her energy. She ran between the swings and the slide, shouting for me to watch her. I sat on a bench and scrolled my phone, pretending not to see the way two other mothers kept glancing at me. Finally, one of them came over and said she recognized me from a video and that my husband worked with her cousin. She asked, in a light voice, if it was true that I had helped with his promotion. I laughed and said it was just a joke, that people online were dramatic. She smiled in a tight way and said some jokes told the truth. When she walked away, she whispered something to the other woman, and they both looked at me like I was something sticky on the ground. That night, at home, the kitchen felt smaller than usual. The wall planner hung beside the fridge, full of our normal events and notes, but one date in the next month was circled in red with no comment. I did not remember circling it. I asked Evan what it was for. He said it was just a day he wanted to remember, nothing I needed to worry about. Our two mugs were far apart again, his near the sink, mine near the stove. I tried to joke that our cups were getting a divorce before we did. He did not smile. When he turned to put something away in the hallway cabinet, I saw a thin binder on the shelf labelled Household. It was thicker than the bills we usually kept there. When I reached for it, he shut the door and said he was trying to keep things organised. His tone was polite, but his eyes were cold. The school sent a notice about a small event at the community centre, a little show where the kids would sing and show their projects. I thought it would be a good chance to prove we were a normal family. I dressed nicely, made sure Noelle looked sweet in a dress with a bow, and told Evan we should sit together. He said he would be there, but did not confirm sitting next to me. At the community hall, the room was bright and crowded, with parents talking and kids running around. I saw Ruth near the back, and she hugged Evan and Noelle first before turning to me. Her hug was light and brief, like touching a stranger. During the event, I caught pieces of conversations. A dad near the snack table said something about office gossip and how promotions came with extras now. A mother asked if he meant that man whose wife was all over his boss in that clip. I saw Evan's shoulders stiffen. He moved to sit closer to Noelle and farther from me. When the kids sang, I clapped loudly and shouted that our daughter was the best. People turned, some smiling, some just watching. I felt like I was acting in a play where everyone hated my character, but still watched every move. After the show in the hallway, Ruth asked if she could talk to me alone. Evan walked ahead with Noelle to look at her drawings on the wall. Ruth's voice was soft but sharp. She said she had seen the video from the dinner and heard what people were saying. She asked what really happened between me and Clive. I told her it was just a joke, that people were overreacting, and that this was how modern people talked. She said jokes had a base, and that her son looked humiliated in that clip. I told her Evan was oversensitive and always wanted to be the victim. She looked at me for a long time and then said he had always tried to do things the right way, and that being quiet was not the same as being weak. At home that evening, Evan sat at the table with his laptop open. A spreadsheet filled the screen, with initials and dates down the rows. When I came closer, he minimized it. I asked what he was working on. He said he was tracking some things for himself, that it helped him see the big picture. I laughed and said he was copying me, finally making charts and timelines like I did at work. He only said that writing things down made it harder to lie to yourself. I pretended not to understand the hint and made a joke about how he should send me a report on his feelings. Later, we had Ruth over for dinner. I thought maybe if she saw us together at the table, she would relax. I cooked something nice and tried to act like the perfect hostess. Ruth complimented the food but kept her eyes mostly on Noelle and Evan. I told a story about how hard I had been pushing for Evan to be seen at work. Ruth put her fork down and asked if I ever thought he might not want that kind of help. I said he was lucky to have a wife who was not afraid to do what it took. She answered that respect mattered more than status. I rolled my eyes and said respect followed results. After dinner, Evan went to clear the plates, and I leaned against the counter, feeling tired of the quiet judgment. Ruth stood by the door, ready to leave, her coat on. The apartment felt full of unsaid words. I hoped she would just go and stop looking at me like that. Instead, the tension rose like pressure in my ears. Noelle walked into the doorway with her stuffed animal in her arms, eyes wide and serious. Noelle's question hung in the air like smoke. She stood there with her stuffed animal, looking from me to Evan and then to Ruth, waiting for someone to answer. I laughed too loud and said of course we were not getting a divorce, that kids watched too many shows these days. My voice sounded bright and fake. Evan told her gently that grown-ups sometimes argued but still cared about each other. And then he suggested she go pick a story for bedtime. She left, but her eyes stayed in my head. Ruth gave me one last look that said everything she did not say out loud and then walked out. When the door closed, I turned on Evan. I asked if he was happy now, if this was what he wanted, our daughter thinking her parents were broken. He said he did not want any of this, but that I had made choices and the consequences were reaching her. I told him he was acting like a martyr and that it was not all on me. I reminded him he had enjoyed the promotion, the attention, the nicer paycheck. He said he had worked hard for years and would have earned it anyway. I snapped that he would still be stuck if I had not pushed. He said there was a difference between support and betrayal. That word made me furious. I told him sleeping with Clive had been a stupid one-time thing and that I had done it for us. I said women did much worse all the time and their husbands never found out. He stared at me like he was looking at a stranger. He asked quietly if I understood how sick it sounded to call that help. I rolled my eyes and said, men always wanted to benefit from women's sacrifices and then judge them. I felt my chest burn. I wanted him to shout, to break something, to prove he still cared enough to lose control. Instead, he just breathed out slowly. The next few days, the house felt like a hotel we happened to share. Evan slept in the guest room most nights. I walked past the open door once and saw neat piles of folders on the desk, labelled home, auto, bank. A single USB stick sat beside them with today's date written on it. I picked it up and joked that he was planning his escape. He took it from my hand and said calmly that he was organising, that it was good for both of us to know where things stood. His voice was even, but it made me uneasy. At night, when I lay awake, I heard a low hum from the guest room, like a shredder or printer chewing through paper. When I got up to check, the door was closed. On his phone, small hints kept appearing. One morning, as he silenced an alarm, I caught a glimpse of the label on the screen. Paper drop, 10:05 a.m. He tapped it away fast and slid the phone into his pocket. I asked if he was suddenly into stationery. He said it was a reminder about work forms. I joked that he was turning into a boring admin person. He did not answer. Later, when he opened his laptop in the living room, I saw a small message pop up in the corner. Archive A updated. He closed the window and asked Noelle about her homework, as if nothing else existed. I tried new tactics. On the balcony one night, I called Mira with a glass of wine in my hand and put the phone on speaker. I told her that Evan was punishing me, that he was acting like some perfect saint. I repeated in dramatic words that I had only done what needed to be done with Clive, that I had sacrificed myself for our family. Mira went quiet and then said it sounded bad when I said it like that. She asked if I really thought Evan would see it as a gift. I got angry and told her she was turning on me too. I did not notice at first that the balcony door was slightly open and that the light from the hallway fell over my shoulder. When I walked back inside, Evan was sitting on the couch with his arms folded. He said he had heard enough. I braced myself for a storm, but it did not come. Instead, he asked very simple questions, like when and where it had started. How many times? I tried to dodge, to twist dates around, to act confused. He did not raise his voice once. He just looked at me and said he already had most of the answers. He only wanted to see if I would tell the truth. I told him this calm act was worse than yelling and that real men fought for their marriages. He replied that fighting did not always mean shouting. That night, in our bedroom, I made a last attempt to pull him back. I moved close and told him we could fix this, that couples got past worse if they were strong. I said we just needed to agree never to mention it again and start fresh. He stepped away and said some things could not be buried like that. He said trust was not something you could reset with a decision. I accused him of throwing away our family over pride. He looked at me for a long time and then said he would handle it properly. The words sounded heavy in the air. In the morning, he dressed in a quiet, focused way, putting on a simple shirt and picking up a small briefcase I had not seen before. His face was calm, almost blank. I followed him to the door, still talking, still trying to get a rise out of him. I told him he was running to his mother, that he always let other people control him. He said only one thing, that he was doing what he should have done the moment he saw the pattern. I did not understand what he meant, and I hated that. As the door latch clicked behind him, and he walked out with the briefcase, his phone alarm labelled paper drop 10:05 a.m. buzzed on the table and then went silent. I went to the office tower ready to drag him into a scene and force him to listen. The lobby was bright and cold, with people moving around us like we were just part of the furniture. I saw Evan near the seating area with Ruth and Noelle. They were dressed neat, like for a meeting, not for work. I called his name, but before he turned, a woman in a plain suit stepped in front of me. She asked for my full name, then said she was here to give me a divorce petition with temporary orders. She placed a thick envelope in my hand and said the orders took effect today. My fingers shook as I opened it and saw words about marital misconduct, custody schedules, and exclusive use of the apartment granted to him. I looked up and watched Evan step into the elevator with Noelle, while Ruth kept a gentle hand on our daughter's shoulder, and the doors slid shut on them and left me standing alone with the papers.